What's going on, Titan fans? Another episode of Titans Brawl. I got Sam, Sal, Nick here. It's the off season, so there's nobody better for us to bring in. Good friend of the pod, person that covers the Titans more than anybody, the best of anybody. We got Turron Davenport. Turron, how you doing, my man?
Hey, what's going on, fellas? Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so we're going in this off season, and we've been trying to kind of talk about what we think the Titans need to do, what's going on in the NFL, and we act like we know what's going on, but you really know what's going on. So we wanted to bring you in to kind of talk about what some things that are going on in the off season, and just kind of just dig into it a little bit to give the fans more of a perspective of an insider when it comes to their team and what's kind of going on around the league. There's a lot of movement going on, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can kind of tell us from your standpoint. Obviously, we know that you're going to be busy all the way throughout the whole process because now it's news, 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 any kind of breaking news. I'm sure your phone's 100% always like just going like crazy. What's the craziest part about the off season? It's somebody like in your role when it comes to these free agents.
Well, I think for the free agents, the craziest part is just looking at what's a fit and if a team has interest. That's probably the craziest part is being ready for when a move is made. It's just the way things are set up now. A lot of these agents, even for those of us who have done so many positive stories about their players, these agents will still they'll feed the information to Adam Schefter, to Ian Rappaport before they feed it to us. So it's just all about having reactionary pieces ready. It's all about being ready to jump right in and get a post done. So that way you get the credit and you get the page views for when that move happens, right? Adam Schefter will break it, I'll confirm it, and then write it. That's really more or less how it works. So that's probably the craziest part, just trying to be on the curve, right? You always have to be ready to go because something can happen at any time. I normally like to take 15 to 20 minutes before I wake up to go on my phone, but I mean, one of the first things I do after I, give thanks for being awake in the morning is go right to the phone and get on there and check it. So that's definitely a crazy part.
Yeah, I want to ask you this. Last time we had you on, we talked about how you told us how there's when something's going on in your writing, you usually have two different scenarios already ready to go in the holster, depending on what's going on. Do
Yeah.
you do you pre-write or pre-draft up a little bit of material just in case of something that might pop off, so that you can get that turnaround fast enough?
That's not something I do on every occasion. Like the Davian Clowney part of it, it just because either way it was going to be a big time thing for the Titans because of how much attention was put into what they call Clowney Watch. So that's one I definitely I had two things ready to go, but not always. I mean, there are situations like Carl Lawson is a big thing right now. He's a guy that I really think fits, but I don't have anything written on him. Just it's just not the same as the Clowney Watch situation. So no, not really, not for everything.
Yeah, there was actually we actually asked a fan of ours. We asked a couple of our followers to kind of see if they had a question. Somebody did have one. They wanted to ask you who's the Titan free agent that we must bring back, and which free agent pass rusher do you think the Titans could get? Because they say that a report just surfaced that Carl Lawson is getting tagged.
Yeah, there were some random reports. I saw two of them from I'm not going to say not reputable, but just a smaller scale outlet. That's not to say it's invalid. It could very well be valid, but I haven't heard anything from the bigger sources or anything like that in regards to Carl Lawson. But let's say he does get signed. I would say, Romeo Aquara from the Lions, who is a free agent right now. He is someone that the Titans could sign right now if they had the cap space because he was able to get out of his contract before the March 15th legal tampering period. He's one. Trey Hendrickson out of New Orleans, he's a guy that I think is someone they should look at. So those are two as far as I think like must sign. I think it should be one of those two. A lot of people will mention Bud Dupree. I'll say Dupree at a good rate. I don't think that you should go above $12, $13 million for Bud Dupree just because of the question marks. And then, I mean, really, essentially, he had two pretty good seasons. I wonder what this year would have ended up with had he not been injured, but he's someone on the mark. As far as internal, like free agents that they need to bring back, it's tough for me. It's between Corey Davis, John Smith, and Jayon Brown, and I'm probably going to say John Smith out of all of them just because of all of the things that he does. So I would say John Smith is the most important free agent to bring back. And he's a guy I think they're going to place either the franchise or transition tag on and figure out a way to get a long-term deal worked up.
Well, obviously,
Vrabel,
sorry, Nick,
sorry. I was going to say, didn't
No.
Vrabel go on record saying that Jonnu was his favorite player to coach?
He said he's one of his favorite players to coach. Definitely. Yeah. He said he really likes Cam Batson too. Actually, he told me both times when I asked him about those players. So yeah, Jonnu is he's a Vrabel guy, so to speak.
Well, obviously the draft is closely approaching with each coming week. Of course, the way free agency is going to play out will probably greatly determine, the alignment of where we value importance as far as positioning, as far as drafting players. But as it stands right now, where do you foresee this team going in the early rounds? Could we see free agent talent as far as edge rush concerned and high rounds or early rounds, a combined just all out blitz, no pun intended, on getting pass rush talent? Do you see us maybe possibly trying to get more offensive line help early? As it stands this moment, where do you think, we're leaning towards as far as the draft's concerned?
Well, absolutely. I expect this team to make a move early in the draft for a pass rusher because they need impact guys. That pass rush, 19 sacks last year. They tied with the 1979. Put it this way, they had the third least sacks by a team that made the playoffs. Don't have to mention what teams they were. Just the fact that it's the third least since 1970 is bad. And then you look at multiple times, they only fielded 3 outside linebackers. They really need to add to that position. So whatever they do in free agency, I think they should definitely still double down and draft a couple pass rushers, especially early. Azeez Ojulari definitely stands out to me. There's an assortment of guys, right? Joe Tryon is really interesting out of Washington. You got, no one's talking about Carlos Basham, but goodness, you watch. Matter of fact, I think that's what I might get into, a little bit of Wake Forest tape tonight. Go back and watch some more of him because no one's talking about him, but he would be a force on this defense as well. So I think they'll go edge rusher early. Now, granted, if the board falls out differently and there's a different position there that's of higher value as far as the prospect itself, I wouldn't be surprised if they go there because you never draft for need. You always draft for BPA, best player available, along with need. You do your board horizontally.
Do you think the Titans have drafted more for need than they should have in the past? Because if you look at some of the guys, almost every single draft really, captures maybe their biggest need that year. Going even just looking at, Corey and Adoree that year, that was going into that season, wide receiver and cornerback were arguably their biggest needs.
I don't think that draft was a bad draft. If you look at going into that,
yeah.
This is a guy in Corey Davis who really showed all of the traits. I remember watching him in the Bahamas Bowl, and he caught a pass and he broke a tackle and he ran down the sideline. And I told him, years later when I actually got to meet him, I said, man, you reminded me of T.O. in that, and that's the level of talent that he had. Mm-hmm. It just hasn't fully panned out. It started to show flashes, especially last year. So I don't think that was a bad draft. Adoree Jackson was all everything coming out of USC. So I think both of those were good picks. Now, the Isaiah Wilson one, not talking about the off-the-field stuff, but just on the field, I think that was a bit of a stretch and a bit of a drafting for need there. I personally thought they could have, got a guy like Lucas Niang out of TCU a little bit later. Mm-hmm. But, it worked out for them because they got Christian Fulton in the second round. So it kind of balanced out. Obviously, Fulton hasn't done what was expected due to injury and some other things, but I think he's going to be a very good player. And I can't look at that draft and just after 1 year say, hey, it was good or bad.
Right. And I think we talk about pass rushers so much, and that's an obvious need. But I think cornerback is almost a bigger question mark because the Titans have a lot of pieces, but they all have, Butler kind of has the contract that could offer them flexibility. Where do they go with that? Adore's on the 5th-year option, coming off injuries. You mentioned Fulton, who they had high hopes for, but was injured and questionable. King is a free agent. So I think they could go in so many different directions this offseason. What is your gut telling you they do in terms of the quarterback group?
Well, I think they will pick a corner. I know there are some guys that they like. Keith Taylor out of Washington. They like Trey Brown out of Oklahoma. There's some, Melifanu Ofiti. I can never pronounce his last name, but Melifanu out of Syracuse.
Mm-hmm.
Those are some guys that they like. TJ Graham out of Oregon is another one. And then a guy that I think they should absolutely be on, and you mentioned Desmond King, and I think if you bring in this guy, you could really afford to let Desmond King go, and you'll have your nickel situation taken care of, as well as a corner that could play on outside, or he could drop back and be a single high safety for you. And that's Elijah Molden. Absolutely love his game. Love his game. He's very similar, in my opinion, to Buda Baker. People have made the correlation to Tyrann Mathieu. I'm not going to do that. I'll go in between, right? Because Buda Baker got a lot of comparisons to Mathieu. But I'll compare Elijah Molden, whose dad I remember playing at Oregon and going to the Saints, which is funny in itself. But I will say that he's, that comparison to Buda Baker down the line to Mathieu.
CD, obviously there's an elephant in the room that's come about over these past few days as far as our last first round draft pick and where his mindset is. I think it's safe to say, as collectively as a fan base, we've pretty much given up hope on the chances that Isaiah Wilson is going to be, a star right tackle for this football team. But being so close to the organization, give us an outlook of what the temperature in the room is with the Titans as far as where they are on him. Because he can say whatever he wants on Twitter. Obviously, put out that he's done with Titan football and they deleted it. If evident, realistically, it all comes down to what Tennessee wants to do. What's the temperature in the room right now on him?
Yeah, and not only does it come down to what they want to do, it comes down to what can they do. Because I firmly believe that they would like to move on from him, but they're hanging on for two reasons. He's a draft pick, right? And a first round pick at that. And then if they release him, that's his cap numbers accelerated to $5 million. And this is a team that can't really afford these type of things. So you look at this past season, they didn't pay him his full season salary because they were able to not do that due to him being placed on NFI and also the suspension that he had. That very well may be grounds for them to get out of the guaranteed part of the contract altogether. Now, if that happens, now you got a different situation, whereas you could play ball a little bit, you can get rid of them and not worry about cost of money. I will say I know that there's a great deal of frustration in that building from top to bottom. I'm talking about from, the guy who makes the decisions all the way down to the guys who are playing. A lot of the players, they're really done with it. They don't want to talk about it. They just, they've basically washed their hands of it. And I think the guy, Isaiah Wilson, has issues that extend beyond the football field. And I keep hearing, and it's frustrating because, I keep hearing people say, hey, well, you should have known that. If you did any research, you should have known that. I know personally they dug really deep. They did a lot of research on him, and this stuff didn't come out. The thing you have to remember, this isn't an exact science, right? I can't predict how any one of you guys will act if you got millions of dollars and access to things you've never had access to do. And I can't predict how you're going to react accurately every time. Some guys, it gets to them and just makes them do just the most obnoxious, ridiculous things. Other guys are able to handle it. Isaiah Wilson has shown that he can't.
Yeah, that's definitely what we've been seeing. it's got to be a very, very tough situation in the front office whenever the guy that you pick first in the draft just turns out and blatantly just disrespects the organization the way that he kind of has, and it's just kind of showing out. I just wanted to see some type of like remorse, but instead it's if like don't comment on my stuff because I ain't trying to hear it. I'm just going to delete you. Like just doing like just literally just putting it all in her face. Guess what? I got money. I'm doing this. I'm doing this. I don't care. Throw his hands up. Do whatever he wants. It's absolutely insane to me. I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, I've never seen it. I guess I've seen it in some players. I guess I've never seen it this close to home. So because of the fact that like we get on here and talk about the Titans, you cover the Titans. Like I mean, I've just never seen one player be like every time something pops up. Now it's to the point to where it's just kind of like, can we not? Like that's where I kind of am with it to this point. And the pressure that has to be going through J. Rob and Vrabel, like I don't wish it on anybody to have to deal with a player like that because a cancer in the locker room is tough because I was always told, I've always been told when it comes to any kind of staff that I've had, and it's the same when it comes to players, if you keep a cancer in the body, then eventually it'll kill you. So I don't know what you're supposed to do, but we can find a way to get away from the situation.
I think the team itself has done a really good job of dealing with it and not allowing it to be an issue, right? Because it could have gotten to be something that was a big distraction, but the guys are just like, they're so focused on other things. It's not really an issue, but it is a cancer because, you know, here you have it, someone who is getting compensated handsomely doing the things that he's doing. And I'm not going to say he's getting away with it, but it's just kind of like skating. So I know that has to have some of these other guys like, wait a minute, like, why aren't we addressing this? Right. And those guys that are saying that have to realize that there are some heavy strings that are attached to Isaiah Wilson right now in the things that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and the worst part about all this, it's the part that keeps me up at night, is that it'd be one thing if AJ Brown was acting this way, a guy who looks like he's going to be a perennial Pro Bowler, a guy who's going to, basically a superstar in the city of Nashville, or a guy like Jeffrey Simmons, who got drafted and his off the field issues continued once he became a professional. But this man is literally done absolutely nothing. Okay. He's been put in a few snaps. He's been put in for a field goal snap where he gets decimated. And it's like, you're doing all the absolutely, and you're doing all this stuff with zero production. And that's the part that gets to me really, because I wish I could sit here and say, you know what? I want nothing more than to win a Super Bowl more than anything in the world. So the guy, I'm going to be honest, the guy can do whatever he wants as long as on Sundays he shows out. I mean, and this is the exact opposite. He's doing all this clown foolish stuff and he's not showing out. And that's the part that really is the hardest pill to swallow in this whole situation.
Right. And even when he's on the field, you could date it back to training camp. Early in training camp, I remember seeing him. I believe it was the first week, like maybe the third or fourth practice. There was an opportunity for Cole McDonald to complete a pass. They were going through team period. Cole McDonald dropped back, and Wyatt Ray just obliterated him coming off the edge. And Isaiah Wilson gave way, and Wyatt Ray forced a bad throw by Cole McDonald. It was picked off, and guess who was cut? Cole McDonald. So not only did your nonsense make you look bad, it made a quarterback look bad, and it may have cost this guy a valid opportunity to make the Titans organization, right? So these are the things you have to look at. And even in training, I remember turning the Buck Rising. I told him, and this was a week and a half in, I said, Buck, you're not going to get anything out of that guy. This team, they're not going to get any contribution out of him this year. And you could just tell because he was always on the ground. You could tell because he was always last to get into his stance. And when he got into his stance, his butt was a legitimate foot higher than everyone else. And yes, he is taller, but he's not the first guy that's 6'7" to play on a football team. There have been other guys that have been that tall and be able to get in their stance. His conditioning was just bad. And you could just look at it and tell. And I think, just from the start, it was just a bad situation for him.
Yeah, size doesn't mean everything whenever you're on the offensive line. I mean, you got a defensive end, they'll eat your lunch, boy. I mean, it is what it is, and that's what happened to him. I mean, we're talking about offensive lines and all this stuff. So let me ask you this: since we're on the whole train here, so obviously we promoted Todd Downing to offensive coordinator to replace Arthur Smith. Give me a little bit on your take on that, and then we'll get into Bowen after that.
Yeah, well, Todd Downing, I think, is a really good coach. I actually spent a lot of time over there watching the tight ends doing one-on-ones. I love his involvement. He gets very much into the drills. I'm talking about taking the bags and smacking the mess out of the tight ends, when they're simulating blocking or simulating catching the ball through contact. I like Todd Downing just as the OC for the Titans, and here's why. So many times when you look at a defensive-minded head coach, what they want to do is play complementary football. How many times you hear Mike Vrabel mention that? So that being said, a part of complementary football is efficiency and balance on offense. What does that mean? You have to be able to run the ball. You have to be able to throw it. And then you also have to limit turnovers. Those are all things that Arthur Smith and the Titans offense did in the past. Now, when you look at Downing, one of the other benefits is he saw firsthand what could happen if you don't grant a defensive-minded head coach his wish of complementary football. Guess what happened with the Vikings? John D. Flippo was the OC. They had a guy named Dalvin Cook back there to run the ball. They had Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen with Kirk Cousins as the quarterback. Now, I don't support that decision for Cousins as a quarterback, but all the pieces were in place to have balance in offense. Guess what? They didn't have it. They weren't running the football enough. D. Filippo got fired. Kevin Stefanski took over. That whole time when that stuff was happening, a guy named Todd Downing was the tight ends coach. So he saw that firsthand and then saw Kevin Stefanski go to Cleveland, bring that same balance. The Browns were one of the most balanced teams in the league last year offensively, and he saw that be successful. Why do I look at all that stuff? Because it shows, it's an example of the importance of finding balance and pleasing your defensive-minded head coach. Todd Downing will have balance on that offense. And then even you look at guys like Kyle Rudolph, who else? Jonnu Smith. They have said that he's one of the smartest guys they've been around. Rudolph said that he loved the way he had them in position, to block and have them understanding the blocking schemes. And not only what they were supposed to do, but why they were supposed to do it. That same thing happened here with the Titans, and I think that's why he's going to be a solid offensive coordinator for this Titans team. He's done it before. Obviously, it didn't go well with the Raiders that year, but he has experience there. I think he's going to be really good. He has the respect of the team as well.
Do you think he's going to try and roll out a carbon copy of the Arthur Smith offense, or do you think he's going to add, a decent amount of his own wrinkles to it?
I think it's going to be similar. And the thing is, he's well-versed in that, zone, the wide zone and those type of things, the play action and those things. That's what the Vikings did a lot with Kirk Cousins. So I think he'll have very similar. I want to see if the creativity is the same, because that's one thing that Coach Arthur Smith didn't get enough credit for, was his creativity. And I have 3 or 4 whiteboard videos showing that creativity. I'm talking about lining up Jonnu Smith in the backfield and Derrick Henry in the slot, and then shifting and changing it up just to open it up so Jonnu Smith runs a simple slant and catches a touchdown. These are creative things. That's where I want to see if he's able to emulate what Arthur Smith did.
Well, I got a question. Obviously, over the past, it's been probably about a week now since the news break. There's going to be a new quarterback playing for the Indianapolis Colts, and it's a guy we're going to have to worry about at least twice a year. And I know since you covered the Eagles for some time, you actually have a relation, not necessarily a relationship, but very much all about Carson Wentz. I know you also co-wrote a book, I believe, as well about Carson Wentz. Is that true?
Yeah. Actually, that was a solo project, and I do have a relationship with Carson Wentz.
Yeah,
so
of course.
Yeah.
Of course you do. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say it didn't, but what are your expectations for him with Indianapolis? I feel like I'm one of the sole people of this fan base that thinks that he's actually going to thrive. A lot of people are excited and ready to throw parties because Carson Wentz, an Indianapolis Colt, And personally, I'm not looking forward to facing him, especially with the help he's going to get up front in front of him.
Yeah, I think it's a good situation for him, but it's just what are they getting? Because the Carson Wentz pre-injury as opposed to the Carson Wentz now, they're two different people. And it's just you want to try to corral him as far as keeping him from playing so recklessly, but at the same time, that reckless play is where he's at his best. I'll tell you one of the best plays I ever saw a quarterback make was against the Seattle Seahawks. This was in 2017. I remember he got pressure. He scrambled to his right side, and he was just about, KJ Wright was chasing him out of bounds, and he was starting to fall. And as he leaned, he sidearmed the ball about 35 yards on the money, perfectly over in between two DBs to Nelson Aguilar, and it was a big play. That's the Carson Wentz that I know. That's the Carson Wentz that I saw when I was in Philly, but that's the pre-injury Carson Wentz. So I think that's something you have to be careful of. He'll show you that in spurts, but it's not as consistent anymore. And more importantly, I'm curious about the mental side of it. I want to see how he's going to be able to, adjust to this new situation after being just mentally broken in Philadelphia. That was an issue for him. So fortunately, it seems like he has the backing of Frank Reich and Press Taylor. His QB coach in Philly is the pass game coordinator with the Colts, so that's a good thing. I think also looking at RPOs, right? You look at a bigger receiver like Michael Pittman Jr. as compared to Alshon Jeffrey. That was one of the things that they did really well in Philly. RPOs to Alshon Jeffrey running that slant. And then also Nelson Aguilar thrived in the slot. Paris Campbell, when healthy, is a very similar. In fact, I comped him to Nelson Aguilar. So you have two similar pieces in place for that 2017 run that Wentz had, where he was in the running for MVP. The offensive line, they get him a left tackle. I think they'll be good there. But most importantly, you got a play call that's going to call things a little bit better. I think the Colts will be a dangerous team. I don't think it's time to party now that Carson Wentz is there, right? Because you do have an option of getting that good Carson Wentz. And if they get the good Carson Wentz, that team is automatically one of the best in the whole league.
What I want to ask you this: what's the part of Carson that's going to help him come back? Is it more mental or is it more physical?
I'm going to say it's physical because the ability is still there for him. It's just he struggled a lot mentally, like with processing and things like that. I was just sitting back, I paused because I was trying to remember different times where I saw him stare down an open receiver and not throw the ball. And that's something that you saw Marcus Mariota do with the Titans a lot, and it was an issue. That has contributed to a lot of the sacks that he gave up. So the bigger problem for is mental. The physical ability is still there, but it just goes back to what I said, though. That physical ability that he has, the situations that he thrives in as far as scripting and freelancing, going off script and freelancing, those are the times where he's most susceptible to injury. At least Carson Wentz is.
Yeah.
Talking about our own quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, last year, a lot of people predicted that there was going to be this big regression, and there wasn't. No, all right, not TD, but a lot of the national media are like, oh, he's going to turn back into the Miami Pumpkin that he was, and he did, and he kept the same efficiency that he did the previous half season before. And so he was obviously great, but is there any certain part of his game where you think he can still take it to the next level and, kind of help the Titans get over that hump?
Yeah, there is a part of his game that I think he could take to the next level. And I remember the Bengals game. Afterwards, I had asked him a question about missing Khalif Raymond on a wheel route. And he said that he looked at it pre-snap. He saw that they were in too deep, right? And he didn't expect that route to be open because he thought the corner was going to drift back into that deep half of the field. Or the safety. Well, guess what the safety didn't do? Drift back to that deep half of the field. He came up for some odd reason. He bit on Derrick Henry running a route out of the backfield. Khalif Raymond was screaming down the line of scrimmage wide open. So I asked him what happened there, and that's what he said. So you fast forward to the game against the Ravens, when you had on the one side of the field, they were giving the off man look, Khalif Raymond was the receiver,
Mhm.
and it looked like off man, but then at this just before the snap, he came up and it was bump and run coverage, right? Or no, it was the reverse. Excuse me. It was bump and run, and Marcus Peters came off at the snap, so he drifted back, and that's why Khalif Raymond threw the ball there. Or excuse me, Brian Tannehill threw the ball there to Khalif Raymond, and it ended up being intercepted. All that is telling me that he makes decisions to throw the football where he's going to throw it before the snap. And this is something that you can't do because of the way defenses adjust on the fly. So many times they'll roll coverage, change things up, go from what looks like man back into zone, which is what Marcus Peters did. And he was just able to sit there and just wait for the football to go. Now, obviously, there was some contact, but that's where Tannehill can get better. Everything else, man, like, I mean, throwing a touchdown to Adam Humphries on that deep cross with Josh Allen bearing down and telling him and one,
Yeah.
like, it doesn't get better than that. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
Tannehill really legitimized himself, in my opinion, last season, and he is absolutely a top 10 quarterback.
Yeah, you think that's you think that's just making sure that a quarterback takes a little bit more time in the pocket to read his progressions a little bit quicker after the snap to kind of make sure that he's seeing things as they develop. Because I know some of the elite quarterbacks do a really good job of seeing defense after snap to seeing how a play kind of develops instead of knowing I ran this a million times in practice, so I know exactly what the look is.
Yeah, you can't. It's basically, to summarize all of the stuff that I said, really stop making pre-snap determinations of where you're throwing the football. And that's something that he has done a lot. And it has worked for the most part, but when it doesn't, it'll be an interception or it'll cost you a touchdown opportunity. So I think that's where the improvement has to be made. Whereas you can make a predetermined, okay, it looks like this is going to be here, but then let me read it and see what happens, right? That's what you need to do instead of like, okay, it's going to be here, catch the ball out of the snap, 1, 2, 3, boom, throw, and it's a bad situation.
Yeah.
Ron, just moving back to pass rush real quick. One of the underlining problems that I think a lot of fans overlook is just as much as we need help on the edge, we also need help interior. All right.
Mhm.
And I think it's almost a shame of how good Jeffrey Simmons is. And I feel like he can't be exposed to the world as that Pro Bowl type talent because he just doesn't have enough help around him. And we were talking about it last week on the pod. Daquan Jones is a free agent this year. But if you take a peek at the surrounding defensive tackle free agents, there really isn't a whole lot out there. And frankly, the guys that are out there are older or didn't really perform necessarily. Where do you think the Titans are going to go look to maybe help that area? And do you think possibly they could bring Daquan Jones back?
I don't think Daquan Jones comes back because I don't think that's a luxury that they could afford right now. But I mentioned him earlier, Larrell Murchison. The kid, he could play ball. So he's someone. T.R. Tart, how many times have we see him having contributions? I think he's someone else. If they want to go draft, right, and stay the inexpensive route, Marvin Wilson out of Florida State is a guy I would suggest. Now, if you're a film guy, go back and watch this 2019 film. Last year's film wasn't really that good, but watch the 19 film, and then you'll have something else to say. Cam Sample out of Tulane is another one. There are some interior guys I really like watching. Levi Onwuzurike. He's not as much of a 3 tech, right? But he's a 5 tech, and he's a guy that always collapses. He resets the line of scrimmage. So you get somebody like that that's disrupting on one side, that's going to make teams think twice about double teaming Simmons. And the reason why I say that is because you go back and you look at Simmons last season, he was actually most productive when Clowney was in the lineup. So, say what you want about Clowney and the no sacks, he still had a disruptive input to the game. And I think really a lot of it showed in what Jeffrey Simmons was able to do.
That's actually to piggyback onto my next question, because there's a lot of speculation about where the Titans are going to go as far as the Clowney situation, where they're going to try to bring him back, where they're going to let him, test the waters. Some people have the dream that somehow we can, reunite JJ Watt and Clowney together. I think that's a little far fetched, but as fans, we can dream. What do you think they're going to do with Clowney? And just can you just kind of elaborate on what John Robinson said about them reaching out to them? Does that really hold any water as far as JJ Watt, or is it kind of just we're throwing the line out there, but we're not really serious about getting any bites?
Yeah, I'm not going to say they're not really serious, but I mean, in that situation with what they need, if a guy like that's out there, you'll be foolish not to throw something his way, right? Not to at least inquire, okay, what are we looking at here? So I think they did their due diligence right there. And I think what you have to remember is JJ Watt is not the same guy that he was 3 years ago. He's not the guy who's a candidate for defensive MVP. He's a guy who in spurts can help you. Like, I've seen him in spurts have really good reps, but in between those spurts, it was very average. So I think we have to be careful not to get too caught up in, okay, it's JJ Watt, you got to have him. So that's something to think about. Clowney, that situation is interesting because I think there's still a degree of interest in having him back, but also it has to be at the right price. And Clowney has already shown that he's not really into taking shorts, right? So I don't know what number he will come back on. I personally wouldn't go above 7 or 8 million, to be honest with you. So you have to think about that.
Yep, that's what we were talking about on the last pod, is what the right price would be to kind of make it work, because there's still money that needs to be spent in other places. It is what it is, and the cap is the cap, and it just doesn't go anywhere. We had Adam Scheffner on a different show where he was kind of talking about how teams are just really good at making a cap. Everybody always thinks that the cap is such a problem, but teams are so good when it comes to the cap, and I think that they know, if they're able to bring him back, what they would have to do in order to kind of make those kind of calls. And 9 times out of 10, for us Titan fans, we're just like, no, we can have the cake and eat it too. Doesn't always work out that way. So we'll see exactly what happens when it comes to that. Now, for all these pieces to work, I dabble sometimes, TD. I can write when I want to. So I had an article that I put out that was called like, sometimes you can have what was it? Oh yeah, sheeps are no good without a shepherd. So obviously Shane Bowen is who we're kind of taking to kind of lead this flock of sheep into this season and kind of try to improve on that defense that was third worst in history that made the playoffs, which is great. We made the playoffs, but you also had an offense that was incredible. So Shane Bowen going into this season with that responsibility, what are your thoughts on the hire? And what is it that he's going to have to kind of adjust to kind of make sure that he makes those steps so that we can see some productivity out of that defense?
Yeah, well, I won't get too far into it because I have an article posting actually on ESPN.com on Wednesday morning about this. But I'll say it's not just Shane Bowen. There's more to it, right? Players have to execute. If he dials up a blitz and Desmond King comes off the edge and he has the quarterback dead to rights and doesn't tackle him, whose fault is that? Desmond King's or Shane Bowen's? That's the thing that you have to look at. Now, if you want to talk to me about having corners play 8 yards off the ball on 3rd and 4, okay, we can have that conversation. That's moronic. And I actually questioned Mike Vrabel about that multiple times. So that's an issue. That's scheme. There's also an execution aspect to it, and that's what John Robinson said as well. Kevin Byers said it too, that we as players have to do better. So it's not just on Shane Bowen. I think there's more to it. I went into a little more depth in the article that's posting, but I don't think it's just down to the DC and him calling the plays that was the issue.
And I kind of got that vibe too when John Robinson had his press conference and talked a lot about execution. Does that mean, since the coaching is, as far as we can tell, going to stay the same, do you think there's going to be a ton of personnel changes on the defense to try and get new players to execute? Or do you think that it's, we've got the guys, we just need to practice better, coach better, and all those buzzwords.
They absolutely don't have the guys, and that's anybody who thinks that is crazy. So I think there are going to be some additions, whoever it may be. Don't be surprised if this team signs 2 free agents and drafts 2 as well from an edge perspective, right? And when I say sign 2, it could be, Bud Dupree and Jordan Jenkins from the Jets. It could be, Romeo Okwara and Marcus Golden. It could be that type of combination where the second guy that you're bringing in is a complementary guy that will help establish that pass rush culture. So I think it will absolutely address the pass rush. That's the biggest need that they have. They're going to change that.
Yeah. And that's what I figured. I was more asking if, the other positions people aren't talking about. I've heard Kenny Vaccaro brought up as a guy that could possibly be on the move, and the
But
linebacker.
Badly, I think if they get him on the move, get Butler on the move, like if those guys are released, it's not because they didn't play well. I think it's just because their play may not have been in line, or the prediction of their play may not be in line with the number that they're going to want as far as the cap's concerned.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nick.
Go ahead, Sal.
No, I was just going to thank TD for asking John Robinson the question, though, because it means a lot to us as fans to hear John Robinson answer questions that we all have. We don't get the opportunity to speak to him, and he basically put it right out there. Like, we're frustrated about the defensive coordinator position, and we don't get any answers about it. I mean, we get a stone cold Mike Vrabel 90% of the time when he's on pressers. He acts like he doesn't want to be there, and I'm sure that could be just as frustrating for you being there, asking the questions, as it is for us fans listening to him. And we just want an insight of where their heads are at. And it put a grin on my face to hear you ask him that question, because it's what we were all thinking as fans at home. And I didn't get necessarily the answer I was looking for, but at least you put it in the atmosphere for him to hear. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. And I was glad. And I wanted to say, I said it that way because I wanted him tell me why you made the decision, defend the decision that you made. And he did it slightly, the vague reference to continuity, but I think the execution part that he mentioned, that really stood out to me in the comments that he had about Coach Bowen.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like I said, man, TD, voice of the people. With TD, listen, we're not gonna keep you. We definitely appreciate you coming on the pod. Obviously, friend of the podcast. Can't wait to see your article coming out, ESPN.com. If you don't have your notifications turned on TD, then that's on you. I don't know what you're thinking. You should be following this guy on Twitter. You should be following this guy on Facebook. There's any other news that I know, any of the news that I get is of my notification. Anytime you tweet anything, it pops up, and I'm like, okay, look, here we go, some juice. So we appreciate the hard work that you're putting in. We'll definitely probably be in more touch with you as more stuff comes up, especially because you've been on the money. Last time we had you on, there was a corner that I think played for the Jets. I forgot his name, but you said we should have went after him, and then he got released like a little bit after that. Sounds like, oh my God, like you got to find this clip. I wasn't even able to dig it up, but I remember I was like,
Pierre Desir.
Yep. You were on the money with that. So obviously, keep doing what you're doing. There's nobody better in the game than you. We appreciate you coming on the pod, and we look forward to seeing more work, man. Just stay busy, get some rest when you can, and like I said, hopefully we make all the moves. If we make all the moves that you tell us to make, then we'd probably be in a lot better shape than we're in, but we're going to get there.
Hey, well, listen, it's easy for me to sit here with no pressure on me to say do this and do that. So I shout out to John Robinson and what they have to do. I know it's tough, but we talked a little bit about pass rush. Talking with TD, my podcast is on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. I just had Jonathan Cooper on last Wednesday show. It's up there, and he talked a lot about his relationship with Mike Vrabel. Definitely check that out. Cool story that he had about Vrabel coaching him when he was in high school at Ohio State camp. And they also had one about Kerry Coombs, who was his DC last year at Ohio State. This week, I have Dalen Hayes out of Notre Dame, and I've already recorded it. You guys are really going to like what he had to say, about his meeting with the Titans. And that's going to come out. We got Jacoby Stevens on the show as well. So definitely make sure you guys check that out. March 4th is going to be a banger. I'll go ahead and leak it. I have 4
we go.
guys from University of Washington. You heard me talk about Elijah Molden.
Yep.
You heard me talk about Levi Wuzariki. Going to have Joe Tryon on. And if you haven't seen him play, check my timeline. I have some posters. Click on the media part of it. The dude is nice. My guy Emery Hunt out of Football Game Plan, he compared him to Montez Sweat as far as his length. And after he said that, you could really see it. I got some posts there. And then I also have Keith Taylor Jr., the corner that I know the Titans like. So it's a quadruple, four
Nice.
times.
Huskies.
Huskies, yeah.
Well, like TD digging into the tape. Listen, hey,
Yeah.
let's keep the homework up, man. We'll definitely make sure we check it out. Yeah, podcast is doing fantastic. Keep up the good work, man. And yeah, we'll have you on again soon, and we'll see how this all turns out. But we appreciate you coming by. Always a pleasure. And yeah, man, just keep it up.
For sure, man. Appreciate you guys.
All right, bro.
Thanks,
We'll talk to
TD.
you
Thanks,
soon.
TD.
Thanks, TD.
Yep.
Have a good week.
That was TD, Turron Davenport. Always a pleasure to have him on. Constant professional, smooth, man. Let me tell you something. There is no doubt in my mind that Turron Davenport uses Manscaped. That man, without a doubt, gets on manscaped.com, uses promo code BRAWL, gets 20% off and gets free shipping, stays smooth. Everything on that man is smooth. His head is smooth. His game is smooth. The way he watches tape is smooth. The way he talks about the game is smooth. So why aren't you smooth? Go on manscaped.com right now. Use promo code BRAWL, get you 20% off. Go ahead and get that Lawnmower 3.0, baby. So there it was. Turron Davenport coming on here, dropping some knowledge. Listen, it's always good because it's always so raw. Because the difference when it comes to TD is that he gets to be as unbiased as possible. So we get the unfiltered, unbiased truth on how he feels about certain situations. And it's always good to have that perspective because it's a lot of the perspective that we talked about. We heard a lot of stuff that we talked about already on here. Sal, you mentioned how when Clowney was actually in the lineup, like, yeah, it is what it is. Jeffrey Simmons played better. I've mentioned like when Clowney's in the lineup, if Clowney's in the lineup in that Baltimore game, yeah, he probably disrupts some of the stuff that Lamar Jackson's able to do and forces Lamar into some mistakes. I mean, there's a lot to go into it, and I'm sure he has the same frustrations as the rest of the Titan fans when it comes to Isaiah Simmons. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see. I heard some really good names coming out of his mouth when it came to these free agents, and I hope that we actually execute on some of this stuff.
Time will tell. The clock will begin to tick very shortly, and hopefully it all happens at once because, I'm so excited to get this defense revamped that the longer I have to wait, the worse it'll be. I want to start watching film on the new guys that we're bringing in, and obviously we got a couple months before we're going to see some draft guys that we're going to bring in, but the free agency is going to start very soon, and hopefully John Robinson becomes the squeaky wheel. You know what I mean? So time will tell.
Yeah, I can't wait for Titans Twitter, after like the first 2 edge guys get signed. What are you doing, John Robinson? And everybody just starts freaking out after they start flying off the board. But I'm guessing he's got, 1 or 2 guys he's zoned in on. Like you said, so I can't wait to see who it is.
Yep.
Yeah, it's all exciting. Free agency is exciting in itself. It's a big time in the off season, and obviously we're going to be covering all of it here for you. Thank you all for listening to Titans Brawl. And like I said, if anybody has any takes that they want, I mean, the DMs are open for Titans Brawl. You can always just add us, and any questions that you want answered on the podcast in the off season, we're here to answer them. And hopefully we can all make it through this off season and get some of those wish lists taken care of that we got. But there's a lot of unanswered questions, and we'll see what happens. His Isaiah Wilson take I was really interested in that, so we'll see exactly what happens there. But like I said, that's another week of Titans Brawl, another week of the off season. The off season continues, the hunt continues, getting ready for the season. Less than 200 days. Well, 200 days, something like that now. So we're getting there. But countdown the days. I'm watching FCS football now, boys. We're out here. But that's all we got. Until next time, tighten up.
Tighten up.
Tighten up, baby.